Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for music, movies, and more. I'm your host, Max Bowen. In this episode, I'm chatting with writer Sara Kenney and artist Nick Brokenshire for the new Webtoon series Planet DIVOC-91. This 9-part series is a sci-fi satire about a pandemic outbreak in the far reaches of outer space. But this story goes way beyond that. Each chapter features the work of a different creative team and cover artist. It includes articles, videos, and other pieces of art by young adults about issues related to COVID-19. We are talking about one of the coolest new titles on Webtoon right now. Webtoon, of course, one of my favorite programs of all time. We are talking about the new comic, Planet DIVOC-91, which kicked off on July 15th. It's part of a 9-part series. Joining me now are writer Sara Kenney and illustrator Nick Brokenshire. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am so excited to talk about this. I am loving this comic.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
So this series is a very, very deep one. You know, it is definitely more than just a new webcomic. This one has a huge backstory. And Sarah, I know you were kind of part of the foundation building for this series. So just take us through how this whole thing came about in the first place.
Sure. Well, a lot of the work I do is engaging audiences with scientific content. And actually, I was working with a colleague, Dr. Bella Starling, who is based at Manchester University and NHS, on another project when coronavirus hit. And I think a lot of people who are working in engagement and in science and in the NHS, obviously in research, kind of had to rethink what we should be doing, how we should be communicating, etc. So we started talking about the idea of sort of missing voices in the debate. We were hearing a lot from governments, from scientists telling us what to do, you know, sort of parents and schools and teachers, but actually not that much from young adults in terms of how it was impacting them. So we went out to young adults and we asked a group, because Bella has sort of various groups that she works with. We asked them, you know, storytelling obviously is a kind of incredibly powerful way to explore a subject. And we asked them, you know, would they be interested in a comic? What would that be like? Would it be a print? Would it be digital? And we kind of used that initial research to come up with the idea behind Planet DIVOC-91.
And I know that there are a number of scientific institutions that have actually kickstarted this thing. I'm going to give folks at home a quick rundown. This includes the NIHR Manchester Biomedical Research Center, the Royal Society of Chemistry, University of Manchester, and several others. What role did they play aside from providing funding? Did they offer scientific background for the series?
Yeah, sure. So mostly the Academy of Medical Sciences we're working with in terms of sort of accessing lots of experts. And obviously our whole group, we have sort of various experts that we work with anyway, but they, because of that, you know, institution, they, for example, they got us access to the chief government scientist, Professor Patrick Vallance, for our young adults to interview for the very first interview, which was a terrifying experience for everyone, by the way, although he was really, really nice, but it was a bit like, what a big person to have to interview first. But we basically, the people that we're interviewing are really driven by the young adults in terms of the questions that they want to ask. So they might say, well, we're interested in the history of pandemics, or they might say to us, we're interested in mental health in young adults or immunization, or so we're guided by what they're interested in. And then we go to sort of the institutions and say, right, have you got experts in these areas? And they'll offer up the expertise and we'll sort of interview them. But we are involving the writers and the artists in this process as well. So, for example, we had Hannah Berry, who's the UK Comics Laureate, who joined in with a conversation with the young adults and the scientists and the artists as well. Same with Rachel Smith, who has joined in with a public health expert, and a historian of psychology was another expert we spoke to. And so we're kind of trying to bring all these different types of people together in a space to kind of co-curate, if you like. Mm-hmm. So it's quite an interesting process.
Very cool. And I love all the extras that go into this. You have music, you have interviews with various experts in different fields, talking about how this pandemic will be looked at years from now, the psychology behind folks who are just going through 5 or 6 months of going nowhere. It's really cool, all the different subjects you've touched on, and this all came about from the interviews with the young people.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to bring different elements of arts and science together. You know, sort of as a writer, music really impacts my work. So a certain song will make me think of a scene or a character, or you know, will kind of help me expand on a story world. And I think, you know, sort of for young adults, music is a big part of their life. And actually, a lot of the musicians we're working with are young adults who've been obviously impacted by coronavirus, so they have their own stories, etc. So I think too often we separate the worlds of art and science, and actually there's, you know, storytelling and music and can actually be a very, very powerful way to explore science. And there's a lot that can come from that. So I think, yes, that I guess that came from working in engagement and sort of having an understanding of how you can bring these worlds together.
Mm-hmm. Does this also help to address the misinformation that comes out regarding the COVID? Because I know that that's been the biggest issue for the science community is people hear this and they hear that, and some of it's complete just garbage. Do you find that kind of through this you're able to sort of tackle that big problem?
I think when we set out to do this, one of the things we said is there's so much information out there telling us what to do. And so we didn't want to provide more information per se about, you know, the detail of what you should do and all that. It was more about making sense. So how do you know which sources to trust? How do you know, when different types of experts might be giving you different opinions on what you should be doing? Do you wear a mask? Don't you wear a mask? You know, is it 1 meter so you should stand apart, or 2 meters? You know, how do you as an individual, where's your power in trying to make sense of all this information? So we are exploring that, you know, in a more detailed way. And what's interesting is we've just had another funder come on board who are a big funder, and they're helping us to expand out into South Africa and India as well. And so the young adult experiences, obviously, as you can imagine, in those regions are kind of similar and also very different in terms of how if you're living in a house that's made out of corrugated iron and your family is, the next family is 1 meter away from you, how do you social distance in those situations, you know? So I think by having that sort of international suite of young adults, we get to start empathizing and thinking about, you know, how other people are coping and how that might be different from yourself. I suppose, you know, Nick obviously he's sort of drawn some brilliant characters that are from sort of, you know, very, very different sort of regions and areas. And I think being the idea about being on planet DIVOC-91 was that it's allegorical. So you are moving, you know, the thing that's going to be the extinction level event on Earth is not actually a pandemic. And we reveal that what it is in the issue with Charlotte Bailey and Nick. And actually what we're really doing is this sort of exploring the idea that what does it feel like when your world changes? What are the things you think about? What do you worry about? What are your hopes? What are your fears? So a lot of it is about making sense rather than necessarily the detail of the science and what you should do. There's a lot of that stuff that's out there already. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And one of the things that people definitely should know about the series is that though it does touch on the very serious issues going on around with the pandemic, the series itself is very humorous. It's kind of like a satire. There's definitely a lot of comedy here. Just to give people a quick rundown. So these two characters, brother and sister, Sanda and Champo, find themselves on an alien world. It turns out that 15% of the Earth's 7.5 billion population has been whisked away to avoid a extinction level catastrophe. And of course, they handle this very well, just waking up on an alien planet, no idea what's going on, and to find themselves basically face-to-face with this intergalactic sort of council, which is trying to save them, and it goes about as well as you might expect. Talk to me about the creation of these two characters. What went into bringing them into the world?
It's interesting because I always like to start with character, and actually it's sister Sanda and a non-binary sibling is Champo, which we sort of delve into those aspects of non-binary identity actually a bit later in issue 4. But they have very different reactions to the crisis that they face. And I think that that's kind of indicative of what I've seen around me is people reacted in very different ways. Some people have been absolutely terrified and some people have really taken it in their stride. So I think for Sanda, she's quite an introvert. So she just wants to get home. She doesn't want to have to deal with these aliens. She's not interested in any sort of quest or helping out in what happens in chapter 2 when we discover that there's a challenge that they need to kind of help with. Whereas Champo actually finds it all quite exciting, and kind of the whole being taken away from the planet where they were facing some challenges. Actually, they're enjoying the experience of being somewhere different, and and actually what we've invoked on DIVOC-91 is that the aliens are all non-binary, so we don't actually ever refer to them all he or she, they're just they. And so Champo's gone from a world in which the default is male-female to a world in which the default is they, them. And so we're kind of exploring, some of the issues around, as a young person, struggling with all sorts of different issues, from identity to mental health to what a lot of young adults face. Their challenges on this planet are kind of a very different, if you like. And I think, also what we have with Sandra is she's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. So we refer to her getting into her mum's WhatsApp groups and getting a bit worried about what is the reason for being on this planet. Are they harvesting stuff from planet Earth, and so they've shifted them over here? Are they going to do experiments on them? And actually, I think it's very valid in times of sort of fear and uncertainty for people to question the motivations of their leaders, to question the motivations of their neighbours even. And we're seeing a lot of this. And I think it's kind of, for me, I think it's really interesting how we so easily judge each other in these sort of situations. And we kind of judge conspiracy theorists of just all being stupid and mad and all these different things. Whereas actually, if you sort of stop and listen to why they might be saying things and why they might be concerned about things, there's culturally specific reasons for why they are, and there's sort of psychological reasons for why they might be worried about certain things. And I think it's fascinating to explore how you might work with audiences to think through good choices, shall we say, and reality. What is the reality? And transparency is our issue 1 is called transparency is for Windows. And I think one of the biggest problems a lot of people have had is a lack of transparency from leaders. And that's what Champo and Sandra face on this planet, is the aliens don't even tell them what the extinction level event is that's going to impact them. And so we kind of play around with that a bit, and the reveal is it's not necessarily what you think it is. Some people can probably get it, but
I've actually read part 2, so I'm a little farther along in the story. And one of the things that I really loved about the series is that you have a different writing and art team for each part. And Nick, as I mentioned earlier, you did the art for part 2, and that was superb, sir. I thought it was amazing art. How did you come to be involved with the project?
My friend Alex Packnadell approached me, and he's an established comics writer, and you know him as well, don't you, Sarah? So he basically approached me, I think, because I used to be a high school art teacher, and I think maybe he thought that it might be something that, as well as the fact that I'm involved in comics, it would be something that I would be interested in. So that was my in, and so he put me in touch with Sarah, and off we went.
What was the back and forth between you and the rest of the team? I mean, I know that you kind of had to. That there were certain parameters in terms of the character designs and so forth, but what kind of freedom did you have to do your own thing for this?
Quite a lot, really. The main thing obviously was to try and stay on model as much as possible with the characters as they had been designed previously. So Charlie Adlard had done his chapter, and so I essentially based my versions of the characters on what he'd drawn, but then inevitably you throw your own spin on things, and so I think they look the same, but there were little interpretive things that I had to do a couple of times where are those feathers or is that hair, or but I didn't want to. I wanted it to make it my own, so I just kind of went with whatever I felt, but it was all very clear, so it wasn't too hard.
quite funny actually, because in terms of sort of, I think what's been really fun about it is seeing how the artists have interpreted what you said. And we would create this character biography recently, and I was reading them back. And one of the characters, Kahali, was supposed to have a missing right arm, and I think they've got a missing arm chapter 1, but I think there's a continuity. I'm giving away continuity. People can go back and have a look, but I think that element got lost along the way. So I think there's probably going to be some, when my fault, obviously, for kind of maybe not being really, really sort of specific about this, but it's really interesting to see how things are interpreted and how they might change, or people might, I don't know, put their little quirks in. I'm sure as we progress, the artists will kind of maybe do some silly things just to kind of wind us up, which will be quite fun.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
You know what? You can make it like a little game, spot, what changes happen,
It's sort of part of the whole give and take, and the whole sort of dynamic of comics in general, especially in old school comics like the Big Two comics. There's always been this aspect where, they would change an artist and they would bring their own little spin on, Batman's cape or whatever. And it feels a little bit like that with this. Like, I can't wait to see the subsequent chapters, because, well, just so that I can see, how the characters develop, obviously within the story, but also like, will their visual aspect have some kind of, repercussions or effect on the actual story or the way we perceive the story? I expect it probably will,
Oh yeah, definitely. Good point, Nick, regarding the two big comic companies and how they will change a character over the years. Sarah, a question to you: why did you want to go this route with a different writing and art team behind each part?
When we initially conceived the idea, we kind of had like a tiny pot of money to do it. So actually, it's been a bit of a Frankenstein's monster. So when we started, the original idea was just to have like comic strips, and I think there were time issues, availability issues, and I quite like the idea of just seeing how different writer-artist team take the story, where they take the story, how they interpret the characters. And also over time, as the pandemic plays out, how that might sort of influence them or change the way they do things or change the emphasis. So we started out quite small, and as it grew, we were able to sort of invite on more artists, and writers. But I think initially it was to do with how much time people could give up, rather than necessarily about a sort of a stylistic choice. But it became more apparent that actually we could also have quite a lot of fun with it. And also, I think as we went for the Webtoons format, it was quite an interesting process in terms of thinking about how different people from the comics world might interpret what they do for the Webtoons format, because obviously it's a vertical scroll rather than the sort of the left to right. And initially we were going to do it as a full-on one-panel vertical scroll, and then having conversations with James Devlin, who's our colorist but also an artist, and with Charlie as well, we were thinking about how you lose some of what is interesting about comics and having a bit of the sort of the left to right movement of the panels. So we decided to sort of do it as a roughly 3-4 panel page, if you like. But that said, what's happened is some of the artists have decided that they do want to do it as a vertical scroll. So what Nick was saying was about, being interested in how people take it forward. We are going to even change the format a bit as we go forward, depending on how the artist wants to do it. So that in itself, the idea that we're going to have we've got these pages for the first sort of 3 or so or 4, and then some people are going to do it as a vertical scroll. I think it will be really, really fascinating to see how that impacts the story, how people, the enjoyment of the story, etc. It'll be interesting.
Nick, I was curious as to what's the art process like?
I have to remember. Usually, it takes it's 6 pages. So it would have been basically it takes a day to draw a whole page. So, but then before that you have to do a lot of preliminary work. You have to do the design work, figure out your approach to the designs, and then also layouts. They're quite, even though they're often they can be very rough, those are a little bit time consuming, because that's you changing things and moving things around the page and figuring out how to make things flow properly, and what, making sure that you've got space for actions and dialogue and things like that. So layout stage takes a little while. So I think in total, I spent a couple of weeks on the 6 pages, maybe a bit less, but that's about right, isn't it? If you recall, is that, you think?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I think it's interesting is it's trickier in that the balloons on Webtoons, because most people on the phone, they take up a huge amount of space for Webtoons. And so, people have had to think about, well, what, how do you get something, I don't know how much bigger. Hassan, who's doing the lettering, and James sort of kind of worked through and calculated it. It's about two. It's quite a lot bigger.
It's a lot bigger, yeah. It's
bigger in terms of the space it takes up. But also, we wanted to design it so that we could print it as well. So we've got 2 lettered versions. We've got one that's sort of a print-size lettered version where you get to see more of the art, which I'm sure the artists will kind of enjoy more. And then you've got the massive balloon lettered version, which I'm sure Hassan will enjoy more because more of his lettering takes up all the. So it had to think in terms of those massive balloons. How did that? What was that like actually? Because that's quite interesting.
That was really strange because, like, I thought because I did know that was the case, that there would have to be some differences in the sizes. I thought I'd left loads and loads of room, for these letters. But holy smokes, like when I actually saw the finished thing, I was like, wow, look at the size of that thing, So I'm glad I did leave what I did, because it would have been very easy to have not done that, But yeah, it's very strange, but I think it all works. I think it works. Hassan is superb, so he's done an incredible job. But yeah, I'm really pleased the way it turned out. I'm really, really pleased.
Was this your first time doing like a sci-fi series?
Me personally? No. I work on Star Wars comics for IDW. I do regular strips for IDW. I've done lots of sci-fi fantasy type stuff. It's my zone. Nice. Although I'm about to embark on a series that is way outside of that, but you'll hear about that later on in the year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Look out for it. But yeah, no, I absolutely love doing sci-fi and fantasy based stuff. It was a pleasure.
Oh, I can tell. Just with like the way you did the layout for like the scenes and like the alien children. More on that later. You gotta read this. You gotta read the strip.
Yeah, it's fun to try and sort of create a language that is both alien and understandable and relatable. So, for example, there's a scene where they approach a building that may be a medical building. And it was like, how do you depict a medical building on an alien world from the outside? You know what I mean? Like, so I thought I'm just going to have to stick a red cross on it, just to make sure people know what it is, as if that might be a universal galactic symbol for medicine, But yeah, it's fun. It's fun stuff. And
it really worked, though. That cross on it really, really worked, because the building shape is like not what you would expect at all.
Yeah, it's all wobbly and organic. Yeah, I enjoy it.
Oh my God, when we got the pages back and we looked at Nick's children, baby aliens, we were like, they're amazing, baby aliens.
They're so adorable, and they've got a horrible disease, and that's so tragic. Oh man,
it was around the time that Mandalorian was doing the rounds, so like Baby Yoda was in the zeitgeist, so it was like, okay, yeah, I've got my inspiration here.
I see what you're doing there. You're gonna try and like jump on that the bandwagon there too, right? Get your own.
Well, cute is for everyone.
Oh, cute is for definitely for everyone. I can definitely see like little plushies of your alien design there.
I'd be well up for that.
Sarah, a question for the writers here. Now, Nick addressed like the freedom that the artists were given. For the writers, were they just given like plot points? Were they given any kind of like direction for where they want each part to go, or was it just Wild West, go crazy, have fun?
Yeah, so I created a story world document, obviously with sort of character biogs, sort of a bit of backstory to the characters, and when I handed over to the next writer, there was a couple of things he said. So I sort of planted a couple of ideas about Sandra's character arc. So, you know, for example, she, you know, without giving too much away, she does start with this conspiracy theorist, but how does she then make sense of things and kind of what change does she go through? So there are a few, and again with Champo, a few things that I've kind of planted, but I'm saying to the writers, just go with it, go where you want. I think what's been really, really interesting is that the ambition of the writers and artists to really engage with the young adults and really take on board what the young adults are saying and get inspired by that seems to be sort of driving the project quite well. And actually out of that, what we're doing is we're running a session with the young adults called The End, where they're going to decide what the ending is. And we're going to bring in some experts, some storytelling experts, who are going to talk about their favourite endings in stories, in comics. And then I've asked each of the young people to bring in an example of their favourite ending. And we're going to go through this and think about what might that be. And there's been some extraordinary suggestions so far. Wow. And then we're feeding that back, you know, obviously because we're on sort of chapter 4 at the moment. There's going to be 9. But as soon as we've done that workshop, we will have I have in my head how it ends, but it's not going to be up to me. It really is going to be up to the young adults to decide where it goes. And then I think what we will do is obviously we'll have some key story points that need to happen, key, you know, evolution of character that needs to happen to get to that point. But the writers themselves will decide how that happens within each issue. Again, in terms of sort of, you know, with the allegorical aspects of it, the young adults are really interested in the mental health aspects. So 2 of them are really focused on mental health. They were also interested in sort of stigma and equity in terms of health. And so we're kind of exploring that a bit in the story. So, yeah, in terms of the writers, you know, they have freedom, but we have sort of story points that we need to hit so that it kind of, we know what we will have an ending and they're traveling towards somewhere, whereas so it's not too nebulous, if you like.
I want to ask about the conversations with the young people, because obviously they're, I think, in a way, almost like in the middle of this entire mess. Like they're not old enough that they're like, you know, in charge of entire countries or what have you. They're not in the government, but they're not young enough that they can just sort of breeze through it as kids going to be inheriting the aftermath of this. What are they worried about? What is there on their list of concerns for what happens once this is all in the background?
It's really interesting because, you know, there are some themes that are coming through in terms of sort of concerns about family, concerns about education, concerns about the future and jobs and all of that sort of stuff. But also, depending on sort of how they're situated, they have sort of such different backgrounds and experiences that mean you get sort of like this quite nuanced response to things that are worrying them. So, for example, we had a session we were running and there was a young girl who is an immigrant from Syria. And we were having a conversation about trauma and how she kind of heard the word trauma being used a lot. And she kind of was sort of noted that her experience of what was traumatic was kind of quite different to what other people's experience of what trauma was, you know, having been in Syria and having bombs dropping on your head. So she kind of didn't, for her, this experience, she wouldn't describe it as traumatic, whereas for others it is very traumatic. So I guess in terms of the young adults, it's kind of, you know, it's that important thing of not seeing them as this one thing. They all have different experiences, different ways at looking at the world, different types of neurodiversity as well that will impact how they're experiencing the pandemic. And so we've been exploring a lot with them in terms of what the research is showing the impact is versus what their own experience is and how they're sort of, you know, talking about them. But it is quite wide-ranging. It's going to be really interesting, when, like we said, when we bring on South Africa and India to kind of have their voices in the mix as well.
Is there any like common thread among the different areas which you've spoken to?
It's really interesting. They're quite. I mean, I know they're not running countries at the moment, but some of them really should be because they have a lot of them are quite concerned around the issues of equity. It's kind of quite a big theme for all of them. I think what, you know, obviously coronavirus has shone a light on the fact, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say this, has shone the light, but has shown that how certain groups within society have been impacted worse because of, you know, lots and lots of issues around inequalities in health. Pretty universally, they have all voiced concerns about that and how we change that. And so I think that is heartening. It's heartening to see that they're worried about that rather than just sort of necessarily sort of selfish things about their careers and their future. Of course, they're concerned about that, but they have all definitely be concerned about things like stigma, things like equity.
Definitely good to see that they're not just worried about, I can't go out to shows or hang with my friends. They're saying, okay, we have a big problem here, and this is bringing all these things, like you said, to light. I want to ask also a bit about working with Dr. Bella Starling. I know that she is like a big part of this too, and that you two were actually working on some things prior to Planet DIVOC. You're working on your own creative projects. I'm curious as to what those were and if they wound up being sort of factored into the current project.
Yeah, so we were both working on one project was looking at antibiotic resistance in critical care and environment, and we were exploring a engagement project where we engage with patient groups where patients end up in the critical care environment. We're working with a doctor there and looking at how you talk about the use of antibiotics in that environment and what say parent groups were worried about, what they sort of understood about antibiotic resistance, etc. So that was one area we're working at. And then another project we're working on was with a group of experts in Malawi, and we were looking at infection, immunization and vaccination in the UK and in Malawi, and the difference between what people understood about sort of community and how that affected their sort of uptake of vaccination and what they thought about it versus the sort of the more individual sort of view on sort of vaccination and immunization. So those projects were kind of ask the audience projects, if you like, sort of asking the audience what they think about subjects and trying to sort of understand the different perspectives. So they were just two projects that Bella was running those projects at Vocal, which is part of the NHS Manchester and University. And I was consulting on both of them because they were interested in participatory arts and the use of sequential art and comics in there.
Now, I know that this series, as it progresses, will touch on a lot of different subjects related to the pandemic. I'm curious, is there one that you think is especially important?
Nick, do you want to answer that first?
My focus was obviously on this section of the story. So for me, the thing that I was involving myself emotionally with was what Sarah was talking about before, about like the different reactions of the two main characters. And like for me, Sanda, even though she has all these ideas about what's going on, to me, she sort of represented very much this idea of kind of wanting to run away from things or to get back to normal or find some way of just making it all make sense and making everything go away. You know what I mean? And I can relate to that. When I was drawing like her facial features and things like that, I found myself really connecting a lot with it. So thematically, even though the story has huge themes, for me, the theme that I connected to with the most was the need to make sense of things on a personal level, and like to maybe get over the need to, or that desire to just run away, you know what I mean, and find a way to deal with it. And the way that we're having to deal with it is by accepting the importance of certain things. So when Sanda, sees the kids, it strikes a chord, and we've all got to find that because we're all in it together. So we've all got to find that thing that galvanizes us, to do the right thing. Hopefully.
It's really interesting what Nick says, because it kind of chimes with something I'm, I suppose it's not really a theme, but an idea that I've been reading about is, how we use social imagination to create positive change. And I think, historically, I was reading a paper about how we had more utopic stories in science fiction and stuff, and we kind of imagined different types of societies or imagined our ways in a positive way out of problems and stuff. And actually, too much dystopia, does it stop us from really, really sort of thinking about how, better worlds, more utopic worlds, how we create change? And I guess Afrofuturism is very much a part of that. It's sort of imagining, a more positive, a different way at sort of looking at advancements in Africa and, their control and their power and their future in a positive way, basically. And I think with this story, and I've been saying this to all of them, I've been sending people this paper I've been reading about social imagination and how we how we imagine better futures and how storytelling help us with this. And so for this, I'd like it. I don't want to give away the ending, but it's not necessarily going to be a happy ending. But I think, you want. I don't know. We don't know what the ending is yet. But we want. I like the idea of us using storytelling and imagination, or thinking about how we can, particularly for young adults, so that they're not just faced with climate change and mental health problems and pandemics, and they can actually start to imagine futures that are positive for them. I really think it's important. We need to start doing that.
A lot of writers, they work, including myself, writers and artists, sort of function on the premise that you can effect change. Even if it's micro change. Change in thought, change in bigger things. And storytelling of this type has to be a part of it, because it's so part of our culture now, more than it ever has been. So like there's no way around it. We have to use it if we want to teach people, or if we want to get through to people that might not otherwise be got through to. Is that a sentence? But
I'll take that.
It's got to be used, and this is a wonderful thing. I'm trying to think of one myself, to do, but too busy doing other people's stories. I need to do one for myself.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Sara and Nick, thank you both very much for talking to me. I really appreciate this. And for the folks at home, check out this one, Planet DIVOC-91. Part 1 out now. Part 2 out on August 19th. You can check this out through Webtoon. It's a free service. Download the app for your phone, your iPad. Check it out on your computer. However you do it, look this one up. It's a great series. Thank you both very much. Oh, before we go, though, where do folks go to learn more about you and to check out your work? And Nick, we'll start with you.
You can find me on Instagram under Nick Brokenshire, also Twitter and Facebook. Nick Brokenshire, easy to find.
I've got my company website, which is Wowbagger Productions. And for this project, there's sort of lots of details on the Vocal, the Manchester University website as well. But yeah, I'm on Twitter, a bit on Instagram, not really. I'm not great at social media, just kind of lurk a bit.
I get you. Well, thank you both very much for talking to me, and I very much look forward to the rest of the series.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
This is Angelina Singer, author of the Upper World series, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout, the best podcast for independent artists.
Picture this. You finished your first book and nailed it. The plot, the characters, all the twists and turns. This one's a winner, and all you need is the right cover. If you've got my art skills, this is the part where panic usually sets in. Enter the cover villain, hero to writers everywhere. Founded by noted author Remy Flagg, Cover Villain focuses on composite image covers for science fiction and fantasy writers. Give them the details, and they'll craft a cover using popular trends that everyone will want to see. But wait, you say, I've got ideas of my own. No problem, as Cover Villain loves a good collaboration. As they say, our goal is to put a little villain in every cover we make. Want to know more? Then head to covervillain.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram. This great new business launches on August 21st with a virtual party at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
All right, folks, that brings the episode to a close. You can follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout, and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. And check out citywide.blogspot.com. Listen to the show on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, YouTube, and every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. As always, keep those ears open.